Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Nazir, Daf Yud. Today's stuff is sponsored by David and Mitzi Geffen in loving memory of David's grandmother, Rabbanit Sarah Hannah Geffen, on Tu B'Shvat Yurtzeit. She and her husband, Rav Tuvi Geffen, Rabbi of Shiur Israel in Atlanta, brought up their 8 children with love and learning. Happy Tu B'Shvat to everybody. We're now going to get started. We'll do a quick review of yesterday, the end of yesterday's daf, just so we remember what we're up to. We had a Mishnah, and the Mishnah brought 2 cases. We're going to focus more on the second case. I'm not going to go back to the first, but it's very dependent on the order in which you say things. If you say, I'm going to be a Nazir when my child is born, but they also add at the end, but I am a Nazir, and your child's not born yet. So the assumption here is that when you take upon Nazirut, it goes in right immediately. So basically, even though I said the first thing was I'm going to be a Nazir when my child is born, if you say at the end, Hareini Nazir, you become a Nazir immediately. What happens when your child is born if you haven't finished your 30 days? So the Mishnah said you stop, you take a break. It's kind of like putting the Nazirut on pause. You do the Nazirut of the child, and then you go back to the Nazirut that you started with from the beginning. I call the Nazirut of the child because that's where the Gemara is going to call it later, which really means the Nazirut you took upon yourself for having a child. So now we talked about the fact that there's a debate, and I'll just clarify one thing that I actually saw there were 2 opinions about, so I wanted to clarify. There's 2 opinions, and within one of the opinions there's 2 opinions. So let's just go through the options here. How does this work technically speaking? So like I said, you pause it, you then go to the next Nazirut, and then what happens at the end? So let's say, we gave the example yesterday, you were 20 days and then your child was born. Then you do Nazirut for 30 days, and then you go back and do another 10 days. Do you shave at the end of the fifth day, number 50, when you finish the second? It's confusing because it's really the first Nazirut that you did second. When you finish that, do you shave and bring sacrifices? Some say yes. And then what do you do after that? Then you're a little bit stuck because you have 10 days left of the first. What do? How do you can't shave after 10 days. You need growth of 30 days. We're going to see this situation in today's Gemara later, which is in the event that, let's say you hold, like the Rishon, again, this is a good example of the Mishnah doesn't tell you everything, okay? It doesn't explain itself. We had this in the skills course yesterday, where we had this Mishnah that distinguished between derech aliyah, derech yirida, but didn't explain to you what exactly derech aliyah meant. Was it more strict or was it more lenient, right? So lots of times the Mishnah doesn't tell you everything. So the Rishonim have to kick in and say, what do we think is missing here? So some say you do 2 sets, and then what would you do? You would have to wait. You would basically finish at day 60, but you'd have to wait another 20 days for your hair to grow long enough to do the process. And we're going to talk about what's your status in those days, because that situation could arise in a bunch of different scenarios, not just in this case. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is no, you wait till the end and you do everything at the end. Now, what is everything at the end? So there's a good question. You can't shave twice, okay? Because you can't shave your hair twice and you only shave it once, some people say, so in the end, you only bring 1 set of sacrifices, because with each shaving comes a set of sacrifices. Some people say, no, you do 1 shaving because you can't do 2, but you bring 2 sets of sacrifices, both for the first Nazirut and for the second. So there's, again, 2 opinions, and within the second opinion that we just discussed, there's 2 options, which is either 2 sets of sacrifices or maybe only 1 set. Now came Rava and asked a different case. Now, the distinction some people make between Rava's case and the Mishnah's case is in the Mishnah's case, when you said that, I'm going to be a Nazir right now, theoretically, after you already said I'm going to be a Nazir when my child is born, you might have thought that you had enough time before your child was born to actually have a full time period of Nazirut. Right? You could have, and in the end, you didn't, according to the case in the Mishnah, but potentially you could have. In this case, we're going to have a situation, what Rava says is, you said, I'm going to be a Nazir in 20 days. And then you said, Me'achshav, and from now, 100 days. Now, many people don't actually think Me'achshav means, and starting now. Because if you really said starting now, it would be clear you meant starting now. And some people say Me'achshav just means, and I'm taking upon myself Nazirut right now of 100 days. That means I'm taking it upon myself right now, but not necessarily I'm doing it right now. Okay, anyway, there's a little bit of a debate about that, but let's leave that aside. The main point here is that when you said I'm going to be a Nazir for 100 days, you knew that in 20 days you were basically taking upon yourself a different Nazirut. So maybe in that case, maybe you're really not a Nazir now, and you should really do 20 days and then 100 days, because clearly there's an overlap here. To which the Gemara said, shouldn't matter 100 days, it shouldn't matter 30 days. Why didn't you ask the question about 30 days? To which the Gemara asked, in fact, really Rava did. Okay, and that's where we ended yesterday. He asked one question within another, which is, and now we're going to read it inside and explain the question well. Imtim Salomer. Imtim Salomer is a structure where we ask questions and then we say, and if you want to say the answer is this, because we don't really know what the answer is, but if you want to say this, I'm going to ask another question. So Imtim Salomer, Nizirut Mu'etet. Kevanda, okay, if you have a shorter period, like 30 days and not 100 days. Kevanda Asara Yomin Hudiyatrin, because you're only going to have 10 days left at the end. Remember, you're going to do 20. Day 20, your new Nizirut is going to happen, and then you're going to go back to 10 days. Maybe Lo Salak Lehadan Asara Vadai. Maybe you would say, for sure, those days aren't going to start right away because you're only going to be left with 10 at the end. And now let's go back to our options. If you're left with 10, it doesn't make sense because then you're going to have to grow your hair. And that's if we say that you actually shave on day 50, then it's going to make no sense because you're going to have to grow your hair anyway for another 20 days after you finish those 10. So of course, you really meant to do it after. Or if we say you don't shave, then what's the difference about growing your hair? You've been growing your hair for the last 60 days. But some people say, no, you'll need hair growth, even though, this is an interesting one, even though you're not shaving your hair on day 50. When day 50 ends and you go back to your original Nizirut, you need a time period of after that one finishes of hair growth of 30 days. Even if your hair has been growing, but you need hair growth for this one. In other words, you need hair growth at the end of one until the next one. That's a little harder to explain. It's one of the strengths for the other approach that you actually shave your hair on day 50, and that's why you really need hair growth. Anyway, one could still explain it that way. So now, let's go back to the beginning. If you say there's only 10 days left at the end, then obviously I meant I'm going to do it after day 50. Basically, days 1 to 20 are going to be nothing. Day 20 starts my first time period of Nizirut that I mentioned. And then on day 50, right, I'll shave. After day 50, 51, I'll shave, I'll do all that stuff. And then I will start the second set of being a Nazir. So if you say that, which again, we don't know, but if you're going to say that, Nazir Me'ayom, but maybe if I had said from the beginning 100 days, Kevan de'ile tmanin yomin levasof salkin le'olo. But in the event that I'll still have 80 days at the end, maybe I really did mean to start this one now, the next one after 20 days, and then go back and finish up the 80 days, because in those 80 days, I will definitely have enough hair growth needed for the Nizirut. Okay. Why, what I didn't get into here, but again, I think these are really all theoretical cases, but why anyone would do this is a really good question, right? Why you're taking upon Nazirut of 100 days and taking on 20 days, in day 20, that whole thing really is hard to understand. But I think what they're trying to get at is, what's the situation with these overlapping Naziriyot? How do they work? We're going to see some other questions about them as we go on. So that was our first two questions. Nazirut in 20 days and 30, Nazirut in 20 days and 100. Is there a difference between them or not? In other words, again, what's the other side? To say no. You said in 20 days I'm starting, and then you meant, and I'll do after that 100 days, right? So there's two possibilities. Let's say you say they all do kick in right away. Well, what about the following case? There's going to be 5 questions altogether. The 5th one you'll see is not really related. If you're going to say those actually do kick in right away, Amar Hareini Nazir la'achar 20 yom, ume'achshav Nazir olam mahu. What if you say, I'm going to be a Nazir after 20 days, but from now I'm going to be a Nazir forever. Now, if you're a Nazir forever, you won't be able to finish your Nazirut on day number 50, right? You won't be allowed to shave and do it all. So basically, by saying, if your Nazir olam kicks in right away, you'll never be able to finish that time period of that's starting on day 20. So maybe, right, Michaela ale olo, right? So will that even apply? Or will your Nazir olam, is it obvious you meant, I want to do one period of Nazirut from day 20 to 50, then I'll become a Nazir olam after I finish that. Because otherwise it doesn't really make any sense. You'd never be able to finish that one starting on day 20. However, the Gemara says, well, theoretically, if you wanted, you could undo, okay, now this is a bit of a question, which one you're going to undo. Some people say maybe you're going to undo the nazirut of the 20 days. In other words, you can undo, the Tosfot says this, right? If you look at Imtim Tzilam Rahachavadai Kevan Efshar Le'itshule, Anizirut She'achul Achar Esrim Yom. And therefore, maybe your Nazir olam could apply because maybe you can undo the 20-day, the one that's supposed to kick in 20 days, in which case you should be a Nazir olam right now, because who's to say that that one supersedes? Maybe you could get rid of that one. So therefore, maybe that. But Amar Hareini Nazir Shimshon Achar Esrim Yom Ume'achshav Nazir Stam Mahu. What if instead of saying in 20 days I'm going to be a regular Nazir, you said in 20 days I'm going to be a Nazir Shimshon? Now, Nazir Shimshon, we're going to learn right now. Nazir Shimshon, we didn't see this before, and it's strange why I didn't mention this before when we talked about the differences between Nazir Shimshon and Nazir Olam. But from here you see another thing, which is Nazir Shimshon. It comes up here in one other source. In Nazir Shimshon, you can't ever undo that vow. Remember, we talked about vows. You can undo them. You can go to a chacham and say, I never really meant to make this. And that works for Nazir Olam. It works for regular Nazir. It does not work for Nazir Shimshon. Okay, it's just a fact. It doesn't work. Okay, maybe because it's not a davar hanador. Remember, Nazir Shimshon, he didn't take it upon himself as a vow. So maybe that's why. In any case, it can never be undone. So if I say I'm going to be a Nazir forever, but you start with, my mistake, you start with, I'm going to be a Nazir Shimshon in 20 days. And then you say, and I'm going to be a Nazir Olam. If the Nazir Olam kicks in right away, then the Nazir Shimshon is never going to happen. Now, in the case where it was Nazir for 30 days, that was never going to happen, it was okay for us, because even though you started with that, theoretically, you could always undo it, or at least maybe that would be relevant. In this case, you can't undo Nazir Shimshon. So because you can't undo it, you obviously meant for it to happen, and then that really should kick in first. And then your Nazir Olam maybe doesn't kick in, which basically, again, what's the relevance? The relevance is that for the first 20 days, you're not going to be a Nazir, okay? Because that Nazir Olam that you took on is not going to kick in right now until you get to Nazir Shimshon. So now they don't know, right? So since you can't get rid of the Nazir Shimshon, it's different from the previous case, and therefore maybe this wouldn't apply the Nazir Olam right away. To which the Gemara asks one final question. Amal ki Moshe b'shiv'a ba'adar mai. If you say like Moshe on the 7th of Adar, what's Moshe on the 7th of Adar? Moshe Rabbeinu was both born and died on the 7th of Adar. So this seems to be a totally different question. Notice you never said Hareini Nazir. You didn't say I'm going to be a Nazir. Seems like, although there's many different interpretations of this line and what the question is when you said like Moshe, did you mean like Moshe on his birthday or like Moshe on his day of death? You say like Moshe on his day of birth, you don't mean you want to be a Nazir, because what's the connection? But if you say like Moshe on the day of his death, so some people say, well, Moshe on the day of his death never drank wine after that. So I want to be like Moshe, I'll never drink wine. It's an interesting creative interpretation. Some people say that people took upon themselves Nazirut when Moshe died as a sign of Avelut and to kind of sanctify themselves at the death of Moshe Rabbeinu. And maybe that's what it's referring to. And somehow they connect it to being a Nazir. So if you interpret it that way, then you're a Nazir. If you interpret it some other way, then you're not a Nazir. What does this have to do with Nazir Shimshon? Some people say that, just like I said before, Nazir Shimshon is not something that anyone vowed to do. Also here, there's not actually a vow. Nothing that was vowed. Moshe on the 7th of Adar was not a vow. You're not connecting it to something that was a vowed item. Anyway, I'm not going to get into all the possibilities about how it connects. It doesn't really connect so clearly to the sugya, but it's another question. Are you a Nazir? Are you not? So now we had 5 questions. Okay, let's just do a quick review. This will be our review for this section, so I won't go back to this later when I do this sikum of the daf. I don't want to summarize too many times, but basically we started with the Mishnah, which talked about a son, right? When I have a son and I'm going to be a Nazir, and there was this overlapping Nazirut. From there, Rava asked a bunch of questions. What if it wasn't a son? What if it wasn't something that we didn't know when it was going to be, but you gave a very particular time frame, and the time frames were 100% going to overlap? Do we start the second one immediately because the first one was only going to kick in after 20 days? And does it depend on how long or short the period was? If there was going to be enough time for hair growth at the end or not? Does it depend on if you said I'm going to be a Nazir Olam? Because then you wouldn't be able to start and end. You wouldn't be able to really end the period of nazirut that you really talked about first, that 20-day period? Or what about if you said Nazir Shimshon, and that's different from a regular nazirut? If after 20 days you were going to take on nazirut Shimshon, which can never be undone, and therefore, if you took Nazir olam, you wouldn't be able to do Nazir Shimshon, would you really be meaning that, maybe you want Nazir Shimshon to kick in first? Then we ask this question about Moshe b'Shiva Adar. And what the Gemara is going to do is answer only one question. Now, again, I want to talk about methodologically what's going on here. We had Rava asked a question. He's an Amora. He had a question. And the Gemara is going to answer it from a Breita. Now, why didn't Rava know the Breita? Because Breita were passed down orally. And therefore, some people knew Breita. Some people didn't know all the Breita that existed. So Rava obviously didn't know there was a Breita that answered his question explicitly, although it only answered one of them. We're going to read that right now. So the Gemara brings to us, somebody happened to know this Breita and said, oh, here's a Breita to prove an answer to bring an answer to one of the questions. Shot minayu kadmeyata. Answer from here the first question. Hareini nazir la'achar 20 yom. If you say I'm going to be a nazir after 20 days. Ume'achshav 100 yom. Here we go, the 100-day case. And from now 100 days. Mone 20 v'achar kach mone 30. You count 20. And then, right, you count the 20 days of the 100 days first. Then, meaning you're a nazir immediately. Then you pause, count another 30. Okay, so that's the end of that section, although we haven't really finished because we're now going to discuss what if you become impure to a dead person in the middle of your second counting, right? Your days 20 to 50. And then does that cancel all your days or does it cancel part? Right now, the question is going to be on the theoretical plane, how do we view this time period of these 60 days or 130 days? It really doesn't matter. What we're really going to go back to are not Rava's questions, but the Mishnah's case. Okay, but it's really the same for any of these. Okay, so they're now going to go back to the Mishnah, Nitma b'yamei b'no. Okay, so now we're up to the case, going back to the Mishnah, the simple case, which was, you said I'm going to be a Nazir when my son is born, and I'm a Nazir. So your second nazirut that you mentioned kicks in first, because your son wasn't born yet. And then when your son is born, if it's in the middle of those 30 days, you pause it, you become a Nazir for the second, then you go back and finish up the one that you paused. And again, debate when you bring the sacrifices, how many you bring. I'm not going to get into that right now. So nitma b'yamei b'no, if you're within the second group, which is really the first group, because again, you said it first. First, you said I'm going to be a Nazir when my son is born, and then you said I'm a Nazir, but you start the second one first, and then you go back to the first one when your son is born. So let's just go back to our typical example that we kept saying. After 20 days, your child is born, you now become a Nazir of the child, for the child. Rabbi Yochanan omer, so if during those days, let's say day 40, you became impure to a dead body. So normally when you're a Nazir and you become impure to a dead body, it cancels the days and you have to start from the beginning. What's the beginning here? Again, how do we view this? How do we view these 60 days? You have 20 days from one, 30 days from the other, 10 days of the first one. How do we view this? You press pause, right? What does it mean when you press pause on a video, right? It means you're going to pause it, you're going to come back to it, but are you still kind of in it or not? So Rabbi Yochanan omer soter, it cancels out all the days and you have to start from the very beginning and count 60 days. Reish Lakish amar no soter. Reish Lakish says no. You just go back to day 20 when your second nazirut came in. This is paused right now. It's as if you stopped it. You're in something else entirely. And then you go back to your original. So in this case, day number 40, what do? You go back to day 20, you count, you basically are left with another 30 days of the term for the child and 10 more days. So now we're going to hear their reasoning. Rabbi Yochanan amar soter, chat nazirut arich tehi. He views this as one long time period of nazirut. He looks at it more like a pause than a stop. Right? We're still in the original nazirut. It's basically, right, we have two naziriyot that end up overlapping. They don't overlap that one day is going to count for both, but they are overlapping in that you started one, you're continuing to the other, and you end at the end. It's one big, gigantic nazirut. Reish Lakish amar no soter. Nazirut didei lechud u'dibarei lechud. No, Reish Lakish says these are two totally distinct things. It happens to be we have to stop one to start the other, and then we go back to it, but you're basically in what you're in right now, and it has nothing to do with the previous one. So you don't have to start from the beginning. Now moving on to Amud Bet, we're going to have another machlok at Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan about a very similar thing, but a little bit different. And then the Gemara is going to say, why do we have to mention that they argue in both these cases? Why wouldn't it be obvious if they argue in one, they argue in the other? Nitma b'yemei tzara'ato. Here's a totally different case we haven't discussed yet. You're a Nazir and you become a leper. When you become a leper, you have to go through a process. It's also impurity. It's not like impurity to dead, okay? Here we're going to talk about the difference. If you become impure to a dead person, since it's forbidden for you to become impure to a dead person, you basically have to go all the way back to the beginning. But if you become a leper, then you just pause your nazirut, you deal with your leprosy, which one of the things you have to do when you're a leper is shave your hair, so we'll get back to that. But you pause the days, and then when you're finished with your leprosy, after you do the shaving and you do the sacrifices, then you go back to counting your days. But again, if it happened on day 20, you'll only have 10 days left at the end. If there's an issue, you won't have hair growth, that's a separate thing, and that we talked about before, which is you might have to wait till your hair grows a whole month's worth in order to finish your nazirut and do the sacrifices, but you're not exactly a Nazir at that point. We'll talk about what exactly your status is in a little bit. But right now, we want to know, if you became impure to a dead body while you're in the days of counting your leprosy issue, then does that cancel your days of nazirut or not? Right? So you did 20 days of nazirut, you became a leper, now you're in your leprosy days. If you became impure to a dead body while you're in your leprosy days, you're not really counting nazirut now. So maybe it doesn't cancel, or maybe it does. Rabbi Yochanan amar sotil. Reish Lakish amar no sotil. So again, they say exactly what they said before. Rabbi Yochanan says, cancels all your Nazir days, start from the beginning. And Reish Lakish says, no, it doesn't. So again, Rabbi Yochanan in this case would say you have 30 days once you finish your leprosy. You have, and also you come out of your impurity from the dead, then you start counting from the beginning. Reish Lakish says if you were 20 days in and then you became a leper, so you have 10 days left at the end. This was during your leprosy days, not during your Nazir days. So Rabbi Yochanan Amal, it's again like stop or pause, right? How do we view this? Are you in something else or are you kind of still there? Rabbi Yochanan Amal sotel deha benizirut kai. Rabbi Yochanan says, of course it cancels your days. You might have taken a break because you have to deal with your leprosy, but you're still within your Nazir days and you became impure. So of course you go back. So yeah, we're not counting the days here as part of your Nazirut days, but that's because you're still within this time period of Nazirut. Reish Lakish amar no soter tzara l'chud u'nazirut l'chud. So he says now tzarat is tzarat by itself and nazirut by itself. Those are separate days, just like the two time periods of nazirut were separate time periods. Also here, they're two totally separate time periods, and therefore, if the tumah happens, it has to be happening during your Nazir days, and you're not in your Nazir days right now. You stopped your Nazir days to deal with the leprosy. Utsricha. Now we have to deal with. Why do we need to say that they argue in both these cases? You're going to view two time periods of Nazirut as independent. Wouldn't you assume we're going to view Nazirut and Tzarat as independent? If you view them all as one, wouldn't you view this all as one? So which the Gemara is going to explain why you need them. It's going to be the same logic, but based on each time it'll be a different opinion that they needed to tell us. To eat mar bahach kamaita. If you only had the first machloket about the Nazirut within a time period of Nazirut, Bahi amal Rabbi Yochanan soter shem nazirut achati. That's when Rabbi Yochanan would say it would cancel the days because you're still in Nazir days, so it's all nazirut. So we'll view it as one continuum. Aval b'haim amot elei Reish Lakish nazir l'chud u'tzara l'chud. But if you're in leprosy days, you're not in Nazir days. So you can't say it cancels your days. You're not even in Nazir right now. You're basically stopped from your nazirut till you finish your tzara. So maybe Rabbi Yochanan would agree with Reish Lakish in the leprosy case. V'it mar baha. So now we're going to take the same logic, but with focus on Reish Lakish. If you just had the leprosy, what would you say? Bahakam or Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish would say it in the leprosy. Leprosy and Nazir days are totally separate. But you might have thought aval bahach. But in the first case, where it's a nazirut within another nazirut, basically you're doing two time periods of Nazirut, one right up against the other, maybe in that case, he viewed it as one long Nazirut because, Tzarat and Nazirut don't mix, but Nazirut and Nazirut maybe would mix and we view it as one continuum. and therefore tzricha. You need it in both cases. So again, quick review of our daf so far. We had 5 questions of Rava that kind of were outgrowths of the Mishnah. Then we answered only one of them. Then we moved to these 2 machlokot between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, both with the exact same logic, but they both needed to be said. That again, if there's different kufot, one of Nazir, one of a different Nazirut, or Nazir and Mitzora, Rabbi Yochanan would say if you're Tameh in one of them, it cancels out, right? In the second one, basically, cancels out first as well, whether it's leprosy or whether it's another time period of Nazirut that you're counting within. And Reish Lakish says, no, they're 2 totally separate independent units. It only cancels out the one that you're in right now. Now the Gemara asks, Nitma biyom gidul se'al. Now I mentioned before that there could be certain scenarios where you're not really a Nazir anymore. You finished counting your days, but you still need to wait for your hair to grow. Either, maybe that's why this is here, a Mitzora, for example. After you shaved your hair for being a Mitzora, you now need to wait 30 days before you can shave for the Nazir. So you finish, let's say, it came again. Day 20, you became a Mitzora. Then you finished Mitzora, being a leper. You did your process. Now you have 10 days of Nazir left, but you really have to wait 20 more days in order to have 30 days of hair growth. Or let's say somebody cut your hair while you weren't looking, and now you have to wait 30 days to let your hair grow. Or you decided to cut your hair. You went against the law and you cut your hair, but now you want to keep the law and finish up your Nazirut. What do? So you have to wait for your hair to grow. You need 30 days of hair growth, but you're not exactly in your Nazir days. So what if you became impure to a dead body then? Because you actually finished 30 days of never becoming impure to a dead body. So, and what happens is you really can't become impure to a dead body. However, if you did, does it cancel your Nazirut from the beginning? And then I'm in day 50, let's say right now, and I'm always only supposed to do 30 days of Nazirut. So now I became impure, I have to go and start from the beginning. I already finished my 30 days. It's really a theoretical, like what's the nature of these extra days? Are they days of Nazirut that could be canceled? And okay, so Rav Amal, we're going to have a machlok at Rav and Shmuel, and what the Gemara is going to point out here, it's not clear whether Rav and Shmuel are pointing this out or the Gemara is speaking on as if them or not even, but according to each of their opinions, they're going to show that the machlok at Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish that we've been seeing is not connected to this. Okay, and I'll show you that in a minute. Rav Amar eino sotel. Rav says you finish your Nazirut days, it doesn't cancel, you don't start from the beginning. You finish your process of being Tameh Lamed. If your hair is long enough at that point, great, go bring your sacrifices. And again, whether it's Rav talking or the Gemara talking, they say, Afilu le Rabbi Yochanan. Even according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Amal Sotel, in the cases where Rabbi Yochanan said it cancels all the days, he wouldn't say the same thing here. Why not? Because in all those cases, he was still within the days of his Nazirut, even if he was in the days of leprosy, but he hadn't finished counting his days. So he still had only done, let's say, 20 days of Nazirut, or in the other case, he still had, right, he was Nitma in the middle, he had both days from the second and from the first, and, he was really Mamash in the middle. But, Hanemile, right, that's only Dekai b'Nazirut. Gidul Se'al, Mishlam Nazirutu, and here's his approach. Again, every time we're getting a theoretical approach about the way Rabbi Yochanan views things, again, this is just the Gemara talking in his words, but there we viewed it as one long continuum of Nazirut, right? Or when you're a Nazir and you become a leper, you're still a Nazir. But when you're in these days of growing your hair, you're not in days of Nazirut anymore. You might have some of the forbidden, right? You can't do anything that a Nazir can't do because until you bring the sacrifices, you're not permitted to do anything, right? The sacrifices and the hair the shaving of the hair is what permits you. It's a debate actually, which one, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But without that, you still can't do all the things. But okay, you were Nitma Lamed, you weren't supposed to do that, but it happened, or you did it on purpose. It doesn't really matter, but you finished your days already. So you don't have to start from the beginning. So therefore, that's Rav, and either Rav says this or the Gemara says, even Rabbi Yochanan, who there thought it cancels all your days, you have to start from the beginning, wouldn't say the same thing here. And likewise, we're going to do the reverse with Shmuel. Shmuel Amal Soter. Shmuel says, what are you talking about? You're still a Nazir. You're still connected with your first time period of Nazirut. You haven't finished it yet because you haven't done your final sacrifices and your hair has to grow. Of course, it cancels them and you have to go back to the beginning. And afilu le Reish Lakish, Damal Ein Soter, and Reish Lakish in all those other cases, where Reish Lakish didn't think that it goes back and cancels from the beginning, because, right, why would he not say the same thing here? There, Reish Lakish said it was either Nazir and leper, and you're in your leprosy days, or it was one time period of Nazir and another time period of Nazir, and you're only in one of them and not in both of them at the same time. But here, this is just an extension of your one time period of Nazirut. And since it's an extension of it, we view it as you're still in your days. The exact opposite of what Rav said, right? And what we said according to Rabbi Yochanan there, that Rabbi Yochanan would say you're not in your days at all. These aren't nazirite days. He says, what do you mean? These aren't something else. In order for it to say it doesn't make you go back to the beginning, in those other cases, because you're in a different time period. Remember, he said nazirut l'chud, sachat l'chud. These were two separate things. Here, you're still in your nazirut time period. It's true, it's an extra, but it's still within that one time period of nazirut. That one, you're still connected to that original nazirut, and therefore, theoretically, we don't know, but we're saying Reish Lakish could theoretically agree with Shmuel about this, and that basically say it would cancel. So again, we had a machloket Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish about two cases. Now we move to a machloket Rav and Shmuel about a different case, about the status of these extra days that you have to add just to grow your hair long. Are they considered an extension of the Nazirut? That's a real part and parcel. You're still in your Nazirut days, which is what Shmuel said. Therefore, you become Tameh, you go back to the beginning. Or do we say, no, it's just extra that you have to wait for some technical thing for your hair to grow, but you're not a Nazir really anymore. Yes, of course, you can't do anything a Nazir can't do, but you still, right, you're not considered part of your Nazir days, you become Tameh. So wait till the days are over. If you're done now and your hair is long enough and you finish becoming pure from the dead, then you can bring your sacrifices and be done. So that's a machloka, which doesn't in the end have anything to do with Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish's debate. Now I'm going to bring Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda brings this halacha that we're going to understand one way, and then the Gemara is going to say, wait a minute, that way doesn't make sense according to either opinion that has a machloka about something that we're going to see. In which case, they're going to have to reinterpret what Rav Chisda says. Amar Rav Chisda, hakol modin, everyone agrees, she'im kidesh se'al badam, sounds like a very weird thing. I'll explain in a second what that means. That means if your hair was sanctified, that means it grew, okay, meaning you didn't shave it. Bidam, what does bidam mean? Well, you sprinkled the blood of the sacrifices. So you finished your 30 days of Nazirut, or whatever time period you took on. You brought your sacrifices, you sprinkled the blood, which is the main thing. When we get to Zvachim, we'll learn all about that. That's what really atones for you, the sprinkling of the blood. And then you didn't shave. And then you became impure, okay? So if Kidesh Se'ar B'dam, that's what they mean basically, it doesn't really say this, but you became impure to a dead body right in between. So you were about to shave your hair after bringing your sacrifices, and there was somebody dies right there in the temple where you are, or somehow you became impure to a dead body. Ein lo takana, you're now stuck. Why are you stuck? Presumably, although we're going to see this isn't really the case, but right now we think you're stuck because you already brought your sacrifices, but you didn't shave your hair. So now what happens when you finish getting out of your tumat maid, you wait your 7 days and you sprinkle the paraduma waters and you're good. You can't shave because you can't shave without your sacrifices. You can't bring your sacrifices because you already brought your sacrifices. So you're stuck. And then you basically are a Nazir forever. You have no way to ever get out of it. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute, aliba deman. It really depends on how seriously you take the need to shave your hair. There's a machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis. Let's just talk about, the Torah says, after you bring your sacrifices, it says, Achar yishta Nazir yayin. And then the Nazir is free to drink wine, which seems to indicate that unless you bring your sacrifices, you can't ever get out of Nazir. Your 30 days are over, it doesn't matter. Right? It's like going to the mikveh. Your needed days are over, unless you go to the mikveh, you don't get out of it. It's there forever. Right? This whole thing, by the way, is a little bit similar. Like, what's your status? If you push off going to the mikveh, do you still have to count clean days or not? You've counted your 7 clean days, right? It's almost like a bit of a similar situation where you're kind of technically done with something, but you haven't gotten out of it yet. So now, once you do your sacrifices and the shaving, you're basically done. And now that basically removes the forbidden issues for a Nazir. If you don't do them, you're not. Now, don't do them means what? The sacrifices or the shaving. And in fact, we're going to learn there's a machloket. So one opinion is tiglacha ma'akevet. That's Rabbi Eliezer. He says, if you don't shave, you're still a Nazir. That's critical. The rabbis say it's not critical. And in fact, they hold once you do your first sacrifice, even just one, remember there's 3 you bring, 1 already permits you. Okay, so that's what we're going to see right now. So now let's think it through. According to who is Rav Chisda saying this? If it's according to Rabbi Eliezer, since he says that tiglachat prevents you from ending your nazirut, toch meloti v'listor. He says you're still within your days of nazirut then, and that means you basically did your sacrifice when you shouldn't have done your sacrifice, and therefore it's as if you did nothing by your sacrifices, and therefore when you finish your getting out of tumat meit, shave and bring sacrifices, because basically it was like bringing sacrifices when you're still a Nazir. So therefore, he says, it was meaningless what you did. So go bring new sacrifices. Now, you thought it was meaningful and it was supposed to be meaningful. It's not like chulin lazara, because only retroactively it becomes that way. Because once you didn't shave, your sacrifices were nothing. It was as if you did it during the time you were still a Nazir, and you can't do that. You can only do it once you finish. So basically he says, so when your 7 days of your paraduma waters and all that are over, go bring sacrifices again and shave, and you're fine. And if you say according to, and by the way, right, I think, one second, I just want to check one thing. I think what he means even is that you would go and cancel, you would still be within your Nazir days, and you would actually start your count from the beginning. No. It would just be soter sheva. No, it's not true, right? You would be able to do it after 7 days because you actually finished your days. But what he's basically saying, it was as if you brought your korbanot before you were allowed to, and therefore they're kind of meaningless. If you say aliba de Rabbanan, well then, how could you say there's no tiglachat, there's no takana, there's no way out, because ha'amri tiglachat lo ma'akevet. He says as soon as you bring one sacrifice, you're good to go. So you can't say ein lo takana, he's already fine. So olam aliba de Rabbanan, umay ein lo takana, ein lo takana. So now we're going to say it is according to the rabbis. And what is ein lo takana? Ein lo takana l'mitzvat giluach. Now he says something else. Ein lo takana, don't understand it literally. There's no way out, which is often what ein lo takana means, but understand it differently than its normal use. What it means is you can never do the shaving of the Nazir. You miss that opportunity. It's a missed opportunity. Hey, it's not going to mess up anything. You're not a Nazir anymore. You're fine, because this first sacrifice was brought. Even all the sacrifices were brought, but as soon as the first one's brought, you're free to go. Okay, you'll never shave you won't be able to do the mitzvah of the shaving of the Nazir. You've missed that opportunity, and that's what he means, ein lo takana. Okay, I see you're asking, Adina, about the sacrifices. That's what I said. Retroactively, it'll be chulin lazara, but it wasn't like you actively brought chulin lazara, because you brought them when you were actually obligated to bring them. It's just something happened and messed things up, which basically erases your action. It doesn't mean, just means your action was for naught, but it doesn't really mean, in a sense, it's retroactively chulin lazara, but you're certainly not responsible for it because you did it in a legitimate manner. Okay, moving on. Last part for today's daf. Amar Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Chanina. And this we're only going to start and not finish today. Nazir shekalu lo yamav. If you finished counting your days, this is what I said, like nida, okay, you finish your 70 clean days, but you haven't gone to the mikveh yet. Or like our case, you finished your Nazir 30 days, but you haven't done your shaving and sacrifice yet. So kalu lo yamav, and we don't know why you haven't done it yet. It could be for various reasons. Like we said, you could be waiting for your hair to grow. It could be you just didn't take care of it yet. Let's say you become tameh. Even though you're still forbidden, everything's forbidden to you. You can't drink wine, you can't cut your hair, and you can't become impure to a dead body. But there's a difference between them, and we're going to be left with this question, why, which we're not going to figure out till tomorrow. Why is there a difference? But in terms of punishment, if you become impure to a dead body, you get lashes. But, right, this is assuming you did it intentionally. But if you cut your hair or drank wine, you don't get lashes. It's forbidden, but you don't get lashes. So the Gemara says, why do you think Tumah is any different? Is it because, and this is really going to be more a question, is if they're bringing an answer, but the answer is going to raise bigger questions. Is it because the pasuk says, Kol Yemei Hiziro Hashem, and the continuation of that pasuk is, Al Nefesh Meit Lo Yavo, all the days that you're a Nazir, you should never become impure to a mate. Now, why all the days. You could just said the days you're a Nazir. All comes to include something else. What must it come to include? Even days that really aren't part of your Nazir, but you haven't yet finished. You haven't done the final process. If that's what you want to say, l'rabot yamim shelachar melot ki yamim shelafnei melot, is that coming to say it's to include the days that are after you completed your 30 days or however many days you took upon yourself are no different than, right? The ones after you completed are the same as before you completed. Again, assuming you haven't brought your sacrifices. If that's the case, well, guess what? The exact same language of all the days appears also by shaving and also by not drinking wine. So that really can't be a distinguisher between those sets of issues. So that's what we're going to read right now, and we'll finish with that. You should also get lashes for that. All the days you're a Nazir, do not put a razor on your head. Is that call not coming to do the exact same thing, to say the days after you finish counting are no different than the days before? Vitu, and furthermore, all the days of your Nazirut, again, that word all, you can't have anything from gefen, yaim, from grapes, wine, vines, anything. So here we're starting with a question. Not only do we not understand why you're distinguishing, but if you're going to say that the call comes to include those extra days, well, then it should be the same for all three prohibitions. Okay, so quick summary of our daf. 5 questions. Again, it was Rava started with them. I'm not sure if Rava continued and it was all Rava, but there were these 5 questions eventually that got asked in the Gemara. Only had an answer to the first. Then we went to these 2 machlokot, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, about canceling days when you become tamei, when you have 2 sets of nazirut or nazir and leprosy within that. Then we had how do we treat these days of hair growth? If you become impure, do they cancel all the days or do they not cancel anything? And you just have to wait till you're pure from the dead and your hair grows long enough to get out of it. And that was a machloket Rav and Shmuel, which we showed is not connected to the machloket Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Then we had these 2 last issues. One was Rav Chisda, who said, if you became tamei lamet right in between the sacrifices and the hair, the shaving of the hair, what do we do? Right? Ein lo takana, and then we explain what does that mean. It doesn't really mean what we thought it meant. And then we have Rabbi Yossi, who basically distinguishes in those extra days, if you haven't yet done your shaving and sacrifices, what's your status as it comes to all the prohibitions? They're clearly prohibited, but you're only going to get lashes for impurity of the dead, and we don't yet know why. We'll figure that out tomorrow. Wishing everybody a great Tu B'Shvat, and see you all tomorrow.